welcome. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming to see this. I know there's tons of insanely awesome stuff going on here this weekend. So the fact that you've come to see me and listen to me is really special to me. So my name is Nick Gravely, and I run a company called Sculpt 3D. And I'm going to tell you about what it is that I do for a living. If this lets me go forward to the next slide. Okay. So I've been working in the field of motorcycle design for about the last 20 years, and this is kind of what it's looked like for a lot of that. You probably saw the clay model when you came, or the clay models when you came in. That was my job, to actually work with designers and engineers to actually build those clay models into actual production motorcycles for much of that time. So, like up there on the left, you've got the KTM 450 SX that I did with Kiska. Below that is on the left is the Royal Enfield KX concept. In the middle is BMW, what was it, K1600 GTL, and then you've got the KTM the first KTM MotoGP bike, and then what else is there? Husqvarna at the bottom, Husqvarna 401 Aero, and yeah. So I've been involved in some incredibly fun projects, basically, for the last 20 years. And it's my job to kind of, I work with designers and I work with engineers, and my job is to take the kind of the ideas and the sketches that exist in 2 dimensions and the desires of the engineers, and kind of put those 2 things together and create a 3-dimensional form that actually is going to be used to take forwards to make production motorcycles. And so this is a great example about how I work with a designer. So this is a designer from Zero Motorcycles, Matt Bentley, and he's putting tapes on the clay model. This is really important because it's the way that the designer and I communicate with one another. So humans collaborate to create great things together. Nobody ever created anything great on their own. And so this is to have 2 humans or more come together around a tangible, actual thing has been hugely important for all vehicle development for the last 100 years. And so it was developed in the 30s in GM, and it's really, really not changed very much since then, because it's such an important way of working. One person will have an idea, and then it'll spark an idea in the other guy, and it's this kind of conversation that happens between 2 creatives to actually create something. It is the last analog process, really, within motorcycle design. And so a lot of all industrial design has moved to working digitally. And so, am I shouting? Sorry, I feel like I'm shouting, but I've got a microphone. I'm not used to having a microphone, apologies. And so a lot of the work is now moving into digital, which makes sense for the companies because they want to do things digitally. It's cleaner, it's faster. It means we get more engineering data out, or the interaction between engineering and styling is much, much easier. But the problem is, what's happened is that a lot of the communication that between the designer and the design modeler has suffered as a result. And so it's all that kind of great human interaction that we had, that human conversations, the knife lines, the way that we express to one another, hey, this is what I want, and this is how I see it, it kind of went away because it became so much more difficult for a designer to be able to communicate with a design modeler when there's only a 2-dimensional interface. It's only because there was only 2-dimensional digital interfaces available over this last 20 years when digital has really come into its own. But now we have these 3-dimensional digital interfaces, and so we're able to move into a different paradigm. And actually, one of the other things that's worth mentioning is that in this move to 2-dimensional digital modeling, people like myself who are 3-dimensional craftsmen have actually been sort of moved to the side, and we are no longer the ones who are actually doing this craftsmanship. And three-dimensional craftsmanship, hands-on craftsmanship cannot be underestimated. And it's something that is learned gradually over many, many hours of making many, many mistakes. And so people who are operating these two-dimensional digital interfaces are actually potentially don't have all that three-dimensional hands-on experience. And so it's my position that actually a lot of the vehicles on the road today, which have been developed in this way, have suffered aesthetically partly because of that. Actually, a lot of those craftsmen are now relegated to only to loading up clay onto the models, and then the CNC machines will actually come along and actually mill out that two-dimensional digital data. The problem that happens is when you mill out that two-dimensional data, it looks really, really nothing like what you saw on the screen. It's a complete surprise to everybody when they actually get to see it in real life as a full-size clay model. Don't take my word for it. Here's Akim Anscheid, who was the Bugatti design director, and listen to his assessment.
You were looking at a CAD screen, but what you saw then in the yard was different. And then you go around it in three-quarter view, and things are not the same way as you saw it on the CAD system.
So this is a huge problem. And so what it means is they're milling out these clay models, and then they're going back into their 2D systems to edit it, then they're milling it again, and they're going back and forth. And so it was during the development of these two motorcycles at Zero in California that actually I made a couple of leaps forwards in resolving this gap that exists between digital and physical. The first one of those things was actually the ability to using a hand scanner. So the problem at Zero was we didn't have any coordinate measuring machines. So typically what happens in an OEM is you've got these big coordinate measuring machines, and they're like a big mast, and you move along the steel plate like this, and you've got an arm that goes in and up and down, and there's a pointer on the end. And so we've got this X, Y, Z coordinate system. X is along this way, Y is along this way, and Z is up. And in Europe, I think it's sometimes different in the States. And all that does is tells you where that point is in space. And the way that it used to be was that the engineers would say, okay, I have a component here that's underneath your clay surface, and these are the coordinates for it. And you would drive your pointer and you drive it into the clay, and you'd make a point, and then you put some whiteout in it to understand exactly how much your clay surface is away from that component. Now, we didn't have that option at Zero because they didn't have this facility, so I had to come up with a way. And so we used a hand scanner to actually be able to scan the clay very regularly, and then actually overlay that with the latest engineering data and be able to see the distance between them to make sure that we were really, the surfaces that we were making in clay were really, really on package. So that was a huge advancement, actually, that I still use on any clay model that I do because it was such a massive advantage. The second thing is over on the right-hand side of that. You see what's called die knock stretched over the surface. So the top one is without, and then the process of putting the silver die knock on allows us to see the surface of the model, but how it's going to respond to the light in a way that we can't really understand just from the matte clay itself. And so it's great for diagnostics, but the problem is if we want to see anything and change anything, we have to peel off the die knock, make our changes, and then put the die knock back on to see how that's changed it. And so with this project, actually with the SRF, the digital modeler, Alan at Zero Motorcycles, he actually took one of these scans, put it into a software called VRED, which is a VR visualization software. And for the first time, I was actually able to see my clay model mirrored over the center line on the latest package, on the latest engineering package, in full color, full rendered color, and full reflective surfaces. And it was a real sort of watershed moment for me, and it gives me goosebumps every time I think about it, really, literally, because it was such a pivotal moment for me to be able to see that. And I knew as soon as we could edit in this software that actually that would really change the game. And so that was back in 2017. And then in 2020, Mark Zuckerberg, God bless him, launched the Quest 2, and at a price point that I could afford, which meant that I could actually try a software called Gravity Sketch, which in 2019 had launched this sub-D modeling capability. Sub-D just means, this stands for subdivision. It's just a very simplified digital modeling technique, but it's very analogous to the malleability of clay. So I had this software, and I had this hardware. All I needed now was a project to do on it, or to use it to see whether this really worked, whether my hypothesis was correct. So I got put in contact by this guy, Chris Cosentino, who's in New Jersey, and he'd spent 20 years developing this racing motorcycle, and this is the chassis that he sent me to start work on. So I was actually taking this chassis into the virtual environment, and then I was using that to actually sketch and model over. And in this project, I was the designer and I was the model maker. Typically, I work as a design modeler with other designers, but on this project, I was the designer, I was the modeler. So I kind of got to just play around with it. And this is what it kind of looks like so I was working on this bodywork. I was in Munich, Germany. Chris, he was in New Jersey, and this was the environment that we were able to work together in. And it was quite analogous to the way that we worked previously with clay. So that understanding each other, seeing each other there, being able to draw lines, being able to pull surfaces around together in three-dimensional space was a really amazing thing. So this is just a little animation of the bike as it finished in its first version. And here it is in its 3D printed form. So Chris, being a design genius, for me, this guy is a modern day John Britten. He built his own engine, he built his own frame, and he built his own 3D printer to print this bodywork on. And here it is in a color scheme that I did not endorse, but there it is. And actually, I'd never seen it before. So that was back in 2021. I'd never seen it before. You might recognize this was photographed on Thursday in here, the first time that I got to see the bike for real. And it looked exactly the way that I understood it to look, having worked in VR. And so that is something that had never happened before. When you're talking about listening to what Akin was saying, that transition from digital to real, there was always a massive delta between what was expected and what was reality. Suddenly now we've got this way that reality is really reflective of what our expectations are. So that project done, I then needed to bring a designer friend into it so I could really pressure test this and see what it's like to work with a designer, because that's what my job is, to work with designers on stuff. So I enlisted the help of my good friend, Fabien Rougemont, Register Design. He's a fantastic motorcycle designer, great friend. And we had the most wonderful time working on this bike. But just a little bit of background about the bike. Here's Brian Wismann talking about it.
Lightfighter really is a passion project for a few industry professionals, and the dream of having our own bodywork design would have remained a dream if it were not for the VR tools. Innovation is really what gives us a competitive advantage. So to develop our own bodywork using these new VR tools really was a perfect way for us to make that dream a reality. Developing the bodywork in VR was a huge advantage. Not only were we able to dream of it and see it in full scale, to get to a high level of design refinement digitally in the virtual world, but we were also able to skip the clay model completely and then directly tool up for carbon fiber parts with a ton of confidence. Really happy with the way the bike turned out. It looks great, makes us incredibly proud, And although the bike's comparatively quiet, it makes a heck of a statement out on the racetrack.
This next video is just going to be a little bit of a behind the scenes about kind of what it looked like when Fabian and I were collaborating in that natural way that two humans do.
You see, Nick, if you just pull out a little bit this corner, maybe.
I am.
It will be slightly less twist. Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah, perfect. Hey, actually, look, maybe actually, we'll see, but maybe there could be a tiny break from, you see, from...
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
This,
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Small detail, you know, like really small.
Well, yeah, because you know why? It works well, especially with this outer.
Yeah.
That
And
could be really cool,
it's some good dynamic as well. Man, I could see that, imagine all that already full carbon and all that. Oh, shit.
Can I go to bed,
okay, man? Yeah. Ciao, man, that was cool.
So just one thing to know is my company used to be called Claymoto. I think it was this year, actually, or last year. I actually changed it to Sculpt 3D because Claymoto was a great name for 20 years because that's what I did, clay and motorcycles. But actually now, I think I'm not really focused so much on clay and not really only on motorcycles. The focus is very, very much on the sculpting of 3D. So Fabian and I then when the Quest 3 was launched, we actually figured out that actually it's much better to work using what's called pass-through. So it uses the cameras on the front of the headset to actually film what is around you, and it projects it into that environment. So when you put the headset on, actually the motorcycle feels very, very present in your environment. And the advantage that gives you is it gives you reference points to actually, when you see something in front of you and you can see it within the context of your environment, you understand much, much better the scale of things. And so here's Fabian talking about that experience.
Nick has been the first to show me that VR modeling thing, and seriously, what has been seen cannot be unseen. It's just incredible. It feels like we are there together, you know, exactly like before around the clay models we were working on together. I mean, really, it's just mind-blowing.
He says, what has been seen cannot be unseen. Any designer that I've worked with in Gravity Sketch now cannot go backwards. It's such an incredible tool to be able to use it. So, and I have to say, I am not a Gravity Sketch salesman. I'm just a design sculptor that is using the best tool that we currently have to do these motorcycles. So now what we've got is I've got this way to go from a sketch, and we go to this three-dimensional line drawing, this three-dimensional line sketch, and we can skin that up with surfaces and get straight to carbon parts without even going through the clay model. Now, I know what you're thinking, clay models are really, really important. They are, if you can afford it. This project did not have the budget to actually create a clay model. And so for big OEMs that actually do have budget, then it does make sense to mill out a clay because, you know, a motorcycle is something that we as humans sit on and we interact with and we touch it. And so we have to understand really what those physical touch points are going to be like in the real bike. So it's great to have something to sit on. But the visual aesthetic design can actually be made now in digital 3D. So the next step for me, really, after having proven out it on these two little pro bono projects that I'd done, was to actually prove it out on a customer project. And I was very, very lucky that one of my clients was kind of up for trying it. And so we did a couple of little projects. And the first major project we did was with a guy called Craig Dent. Craig was he now runs a studio in Salzburg called Ride. Craig was the design director for Kiska for a lot of time, for 13 years, I think. And he was the design director doing so all the KTM, Husqvarna. And so we did this project. It was the Brixton store concept. We did the whole thing in VR, and then we milled out a clay model, and then we did a show bike from that as well. And so this is Craig talking about that experience.
I was pretty skeptical of how the clay would come out. And a week later, visiting you in your clay workshop and seeing a milled clay in front of me that was shockingly close to the perception that I had in Gravity Sketch, I couldn't believe the speed in which we were able to turn traditional sketchwork, emotional sketchwork, into emotional models that you could interact with fully. It's blown my mind, actually, the last couple of months. It's been an incredible journey, and it's just the start.
So it's just the start, as Craig says. We don't really know what's going to happen, but we really are already just at the start of this, and it's already proving incredibly powerful. And so with the advent of the AI advancements that are happening, I'm really excited about what's going to happen in the future. And that is basically the end of my presentation. I have pretty much, I feel like I've explained to you how we've gone from clay modeling to three-dimensional digital, and how we're able to achieve the same kind of things that we were doing in clay, but now we can do it and harness all the benefits of digital with all the benefits of physical in one thing, and do projects in half the time that we used to take doing clay models. And what I'd like to do is offer you the opportunity to come up here, if you like, and I've got a couple of headsets, and we can actually, you'll be able to see what a motorcycle looks like in VR if you're interested. Is anybody interested?